Okay, so hi, welcome back. And I'm back here with Mike Gabbers from the States, and we're going to continue a bit this podcast that we began the other week. And this time we're going to spin it around a little bit. He's going to ask me some questions, whatever he likes. And then we're going to kind of just go a bit more back and forth and maybe look at men's issues, men's workshops, this kind of stuff a little bit, or just see where the conversation goes, really. So welcome back, Mike. Thank you for coming back on.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Really enjoyed our last conversation. You want to say a little about, just kind of introduce yourself and talk about childhood and how you got to where you are here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, looking back, I came from, looking back with my kind of therapist brain, I came from a very traumatized background in early life, being adopted kid. My real parents couldn't keep me. I was also mixed race, brought up just by regular kind of white middle class folks in the east of England, and there was stuff going on in the family. I had an adopted brother, adopted sister as well. It was a bit of a mess, and in psychological terms, and I just learned to hold everything in, really, just to kind of clench down and just hold everything in. And then as soon as I was kind of 18, I just escaped from there and went to London, which was the kind of thing that you did, really, find the nearest big town and just get the fuck out, So I did that. And then I had a job for a few years working in a laboratory, just regular cleaning stuff, and assistant scientific officer. And at the age of about 21, I just dropped out. I'd had enough of kind of normal work and straight things. In a certain sense, I mean, I'd kind of done it to keep my adoptive parents, not really to keep them happy, but my other two siblings had both kind of gone quite a long way off the, I'm not going to talk about them because I don't think it'd be fair, but I mean, they'd come quite a long way off the normal kind of track of British life earlier on. And I kind of felt like somewhere I owed it to my adoptive parents for bringing me up, just to kind of try and be normal or try and fulfill some of their expectations. But there wasn't the drive to do that was not sufficient to sustain me for more than a couple of years of adulthood. And I just dropped out. And then, I was a squatter for quite a long time in London, about a decade. I was a punk. I was a busker. I was totally in subculture and living beneath the thing. I was involved in crime for a while, and knew sort of underworldy type people and that kind of thing. And I just really explored what it was like to be like in London in the 80s, in this kind of the bottom 5% demographic of people who just exist underneath any kind of legal kind of requirement who the cops don't bother with, the junkies and the crims and the prostitutes and all of this, and just living in mad places, mostly squatting around the Camden area in North London. And at some point I kind of, I don't know, pulled myself a little bit out of this and we got put in some kind of housing co-op, me and some squatter friends, because they wanted to get us out of this squat, the people who owned it, and that was give us a bit more stability. And then I also learned to become an electrician. I did those like government courses to, get plumbing and electrical jobs, because there weren't many of them around. And I thought, well, that would be a bit more, and I kind of enjoyed that. It was like contributing something to society, which was a new concept for me. Previously, I'd just been very anti everything. And
interesting.
Yeah, and at some point, I kind of pulled myself out of. And I was habitually drinking a lot of alcohol throughout my late teens and 20s, and I kind of pulled myself out of that, but life just became very rigid and dull, really, in many ways, and I was still involved with criminals and stuff like that. And at some point in my late 30s, I just kind of had a blast of awareness somewhere, sitting in a park, that it wasn't like a big spiritual experience or something. I just really became aware that I wasn't happy with my life. And that if I could kind of have gone, I don't know, if it was like, if I was just starting again, like, being born, I would not have chosen to be like this, And with that little moment of awareness, it was like, okay, so if you're going to change, you're going to have to fucking start now. And I came out of that experience and just began to just research things that could create change. And
That's fascinating to me that you just not only had that awareness that something's got to change, but that it's just not going to happen on its own, that you're going to have to pull yourself
yeah,
up by your bootstraps, so to speak, or do it yourself,
yeah. I
make
mean,
it happen.
also, I mean, for a long time, I had this kind of idea somewhere in the back of my mind when I was really into booze and dodgy things. You know, one day you're going to have to sort yourself out and take account for your childhood, but not today. Today, I'm just going to keep getting wasted and doing crazy shit. But one day I'm going to have to. And somewhere with this experience, it was like, okay, if you don't do it now, it's not going to fucking happen because you're nearly 40 and you need to get your shit together. So from there, I started to kind of look around London, trying to understand what therapy was, because I had no fucking clue what therapy was, and ended up going to a few therapists and going to one quite good group therapist who was also into bioenergetics, actually. This guy, who's actually called Guy, at the Open Centre in East London. And that was kind of cool. And I did some weekend workshops with him, and he'd do these kind of sessions once a week where you go for 2 hours, there'd be about 10 of you, do some body work, and then you do some kind of psychodrama work with stuff from childhood. And I enjoyed it, but I also had the feeling like I'm way too armored. It's going to take too fucking long. This guy is too soft, you know, he's too nice. It's not, you know, that was my feeling. I was quite kind of desperate to find someone who could change me a bit. And so I carried on looking around while still doing these weekly workshops with this chap. And I came across a guy called Viresh, who was a little short black American guy, no longer here. Denny Sanchez was his original name, former drug addict from like Harlem, New York, and who was running his own kind of center, an Osho guy in Holland. And this guy, I'd met a few Osho people. This was like, you know, the early 2000s, late 90s now. And I mean, Osho had been out of it, had died like a decade before, but there was still a lot of sannyasins, as they were called, around. And they were kind of cool people in a way. And I didn't mind about the kind of cult-like talks that people would, because I was subculture, you know, I couldn't give a shit about cult, you know, that was just nothing, you know, I didn't have anything to lose really. So I was going to that, and he was in this scene, and he was coming over to the UK to do a workshop, and everyone was like, fuck, Varesh is coming, this is going to be really heavy, hardcore shit. So it was like a kind of rock star, you know, that you'd heard about from somewhere, who was rocking up in your town to play a gig, and you just felt like if you don't go, you know, you're just going to be a fucking nobody.
You're going to miss it.
Can't miss it, exactly. So I started to do. I met him, and when I met this guy, I thought you can't bullshit this guy. You know, he's been there. You know, he knows crime. He knows the streets. He knows being a complete, you know, smackhead junkie for like, you know, 15, 16 years. You know, and he's pulled himself out of that. And so I got involved with his training, which was running in the west of England, as well as other places in Europe. And I thought I'm going to sign up for a year of that. And you know, I just have to do it now, otherwise my mind will think of an excuse not to. You know, I know it's going to be totally fucking intense, but I'm just going to fucking do it. And so I did that. I signed up for a year. I did that, and then I ended up doing 4 or 5 years with him and his therapists, more his therapists, because he was kind of moving out of just direct teaching at that point. And
what was that?
Sorry?
I'm curious about, like, so that was like 5 years of intense training.
Yeah.
What was that like? What were the different techniques and things?
Well, the format was like weekend workshops or 3-day workshops. And also there was like a 30-day intensive that was run in Holland called the WOW that you had to attend to progress on to the next year. And the therapy was just, I mean, it was neo-Reichian, if you want a kind of psychotherapeutic discussion, a term for it. But it was a mixture of a lot of encounter therapy, which works with the judgments you have about people and the judgments other people have about you. A lot of emotional expression in that time, you know, full-blown screaming, shouting. A lot of marathon work, which is going through the night, going through 2 nights, sometimes going through 3 nights, you know, without sleep, just to completely take the defenses out, you know. It was just a very full-on school of therapy, a lot of primal work. And there was softer stuff too, but it was certainly like, you know, you're going to open up. You know, it's not like you're not going to be able to because he was used to dealing with junkies who are famously on a kind of psychological level case hardened, and it's not easy for them to get to a position where they can start to really feel authentic emotions that are just there. So he was completely familiar with all these techniques coming out of the States from guys like Yanoff or whatever, and Dan Casrael, and taking them to like the absolute extreme, really experimentation, because that was what the whole Osho scene on a therapeutic level was about. Osho was like, you need to clear your shit up and get enlightened, and you need to start now. That was the kind of energy. It wasn't so much what Osho brought in, but the energy around him was like that. And it also attracted heaps of different therapists, particularly guys who were just really interested in therapy and change and this kind of thing, and so they all kind of came to Osho and the ashram, and then their therapies mixed and merged, and they learned stuff from each other, and the kind of stuff that came out of that, was very, very powerful. So I was immersed in this for some years, and essentially I was doing a therapist training, but I never began it with the intention to become a therapist, because my self-esteem was well too low to consider such an option at the beginning. And at some point it just became more clear to me that was what I was turned on to, working with people. And by about the time I was in the second year, I joined and was living in an Osho community in the south of England, Osho Lila in Dorset, and I remained there, and just became a therapist, developed my own stuff, and started to work more with stuff like and bioenergetics in particular, and some breath work, and less kind of heavy emotional expression and encounter techniques, which were drifting out of fashion by then. They were drifting out.
Right. Yeah. Some of those, it's amazing. So what time frame was this roughly?
2000.
2000.
I started around 2000 with show stuff. Yeah.
So a lot of those intense expressional techniques, cathartic techniques, I think it faded long ago, but still strong in that community.
They're still strong. I mean, the thing with those kind of heavy therapies is they have to be held by people who really know what the fuck they're doing and who've been through those kind of processes, and and then
it's like psychedelic therapy, where you really need somebody with experience that understands, because you're just cracking people open and going so deep so quickly.
Yeah.
Sorry, keep going. Yeah,
exactly. It's different, but it's similar. Like you need,
right.
You can't lead people into encounter therapy unless you've really been there yourself and cleared a lot out and know how to deal with. And
so there was this kind of shift from the more cathartic therapies to this neo-Reiki and bioenergy. How did that happen for you?
For me, as a therapist, it happened. I'd done bioenergetics while I was training and doing a lot of groups in Holland. I used to fucking hate it, actually. I could recognize afterwards that it was doing me quite a lot of good. And then when I started to work as a therapist a little bit outside the community, I was going to Brighton. I had a girlfriend in Brighton, which is like a kind of progressive city in the south, directly south of London on the coast. And I wanted to teach a bit there and run stuff. But it was just that the market for heavy expression stuff was going down. People have come much more into the mind in the last 20 years, basically, and gut level emotional stuff is not really so much in vogue. It just drifted out. There were certain negative stories about these things as well. Also, it's quite, on a practical level, it's quite difficult to hold that space in a city, because you need to find somewhere where 20 people can scream their guts out without the cops coming around or the neighbors kind of raging. So you've got practical problems as well as the difficulties of engaging people to do this kind of heavy therapeutic work. So I kind of hit upon bioenergetics, which I hadn't trained in so extensively, to be honest. Some friends of mine had done training in Brazil, and I knew their kind of stuff. And I just started up with it really around 2015, 2016, just starting to work with this and doing it daily myself, and using the exercises that I knew from the therapists that I'd worked with. And because I was already trained in group therapy and had been through a huge therapeutic journey, I didn't consider that I really needed to be trained. And there anyway weren't really any trainings. And I was a bit skeptical about the Lowen school in the sense that, you know, you don't go through the heavy shit that I've gone through in my own therapist
Mm.
training. It's more psychotherapy, which is fine and different, but you know, I wasn't going to invest like 3 or 4 years of my time, and I think it was traveling to Spain as well to do this training, because I already felt confident working with people in more intense emotional situations and more direct emotional. So that's
Yeah,
why I
you
got
had
into
the.
that, and at some point I got interested in the Reiki and breath work as well. I mean, that was only really a couple of years ago, and I started to try to get into Jack Willis's home book, which is the main kind of text on the subject with any practical exercises in it, really. And it's not an easy volume to approach, though it is free, and started to develop more work from that as well, you know, and in the meantime, Reiki and character structure too, which I'm still very into, and I'm currently writing a book on.
Mm. So you mentioned Reiki and breath work. What specifically is that?
Well, I mean, there's two kind of categories of technique, but I mean, Jack Willis, I think he took most of his work from Israel Regardie, who's more famous as a esoteric guy, you know, Golden Dawn and all this, but he also was a practicing psychiatrist, I think in the Los Angeles area, possibly California somewhere, for a long time, maybe
Yes.
San Francisco. But he took his work, and there's two fundamental categories of technique is what I saw when I started to look at Willis's book, which are armor release techniques, which are, you know, tensing certain muscle groups, often around the seven. Reich had this concept of 7 rings of armor, which Regardie didn't really have
Right.
too much credence for completely. And, you know, so there's muscular techniques, and then there's breathing techniques, different ways of
Gotcha.
breathing, you know, utilizing different muscle groups and this kind of thing. And the combination of the two is very powerful. I mean, that isn't, Willis doesn't go into that so much. That's more what I've been working on myself, is developing the different breath techniques. Is about 7 or 8, 9 different breath techniques, and then developing the different armor release techniques, and then starting to fit them together a little bit, because you get a much
Ah,
more powerful kind of effect. And so, you know, it's just a massive, there's just a shit ton of really interesting stuff if you're into actual body physical therapy that's in this domain that's never really been brought out so much, or has kind of lost because of the secrecy that surrounded Reich's work, really.
right. Well, and I just did, as you know, a podcast on Reich for the Robert Anton Wilson
Yes,
publisher,
yes,
Hilaritas
great.
Press. And along with that, I did just a short vignette on pursuing Reiki in therapy today. And it's interesting just to see the different options that are out there and available right now, and trying to put it all together. But in the United States, there's this taboo against touch. So we have like body therapies like rolfing and derivatives like movement and body therapies. And then there's psychotherapy, and even the body-based psychotherapies, really you can't involve touch. So you can with permission, and it works in groups, but it's kind of created this separation in the therapeutic realm, at least. So
Yeah. I mean, when I say Reiki and therapy, you know, it's like, I don't have an exact understanding of Reich's techniques. I mean, I certainly have read quite a few descriptions of them. And he was working one-on-one most of the time, clients lying down on a massage table, and he's getting them to breathe in a certain way, express sound. He's prodding them, you know, jab them in the epigastrium or something, gastrium or something like this, and, you know, breaking up muscular armor and trying to bring authentic emotions to the surface. And usually they're working in their underwear. So quite a lot of that stuff is pretty much no-no, you know, these days.
yeah,
And that's not necessarily, that doesn't actually mean that everything is no good and you cannot do anything anymore with these techniques. But some people have taken it that way. You know, you don't need to have physical contact. I mean, I work personally much more in groups anyway, but with the right
right.
breath techniques, I didn't do so much one-to-one. It's not so much my thing. I do some, but not so much. But I mean, I was more a group leader. And the Reiki and breath techniques work well. They can work well on your own. It's kind of like working out in a sense, like the sort of thing you do at the gym, but you're just working certain exercises to the point where you get really familiar with them, you know, and that takes a
Mm,
while. And then you can really use them to unlock stuff, you know, and to release the past. So it's derived from, I mean, Reich has become, you know, like a term for a whole body of things. And because there's, I think, not so much written down about what he was really doing, it's rather hard to know, you know, exactly what is or is not technically a Reichian technique. But it's like it's just become a generic kind of term for a certain school of therapy, or neo-Reichian, if you want to be a bit safer.
Sure, yeah. Well, I like what you're doing. It seems like every therapist, as they gain experience, kind of just develops their own thing.
Mm.
You know, I don't know exactly what I do, but I just do my thing. And I could tell you where my style draws on several schools and modalities and principles and theories and things like that. But at the end of the day, I just kind of do my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I hear is part of you developing your own styles, you're also evolving this forward. I mean, the way you've got the breath work and the body work, and they're starting to synthesize them. And I mean, I think that's a really beautiful thing. It sounds like you're taking what you can, everything you can find, and then synthesizing it with your clinical experience, with actually where the rubber hits the road, working with people,
Mm-hmm.
and coming up with your own thing and developing it. I think that's great, just developing it further and seeing how to how to view these things from two different perspectives. Here's therapy, or muscular therapy, and here's breath work, and here's where we're starting to see the overlap. So more power to you. That's great.
Thank you.
And you've got this, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say also, what motivates me is this idea to create like a repository of these techniques, because there's nothing fucking written. Willis's book aside, as far as I know, there's very few other books which actually go into the techniques. You know, they're all a lot of psychological theory and blah, blah, but it's actually, you know, if I imagine myself, say I'm 22 and I'm just super into this scene, I've heard about it and I want to find out about it, it's not easy to do that. You know, there's very few real therapists around anymore, and there's just no real books. You know, you start reading Alexander Lowen, and you might find the one book where he puts out some techniques. You know, it's like you start reading Reich, you're not going to find any techniques really. You know, I mean, it's just not. You're not going to do that. You know, there's nothing wrong with his.
When we were doing,
yeah.
When we were doing our podcast, we found, we were trying to find like a referral source for Reichian therapists, and we found like a list of maybe a half dozen people in the United States, which is why I went to write that video or make that video. It's like, here's how to do it. Here's a do-it-yourself option. Here's some body therapies that aren't necessarily emotionally based, and here's psychotherapy. And anyhow.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another part of it, to create a repository, basically.
So that you have this,
you know,
and thus you have this YouTube channel, and you have a couple books, one on bioenergetics at least, and another is that your time in the Osho community, ashram.
That's like kind of based around that. I got 3 books actually. I'm writing a 4th. The first one was like a kind of ashram is like a kind of it's just a cheap kind of page turning sex novel set in an ashram. Essentially.
Oh, fantastic.
Tantra and stuff like that. Some people like that. But my more serious ones were a bit later. There, I wrote a Bioenergetics 1 with a lot of exercises in it, about 95 exercises, and the Bioenergetics 2, looking at success and training the body for success and this kind of thing, and understanding.
Oh, fantastic.
And now I'm doing one on character structure, basically.
On character structure.
Yeah.
Fantastic. One of my major inspirations is Ron Kurtz of Hakomi Therapy. And he wrote a book called The Body. It's kind of lesser known. It's kind of a kinder, gentler Gestalt therapy. And he wrote a book called The Body Reveals. That is kind of, he had I guess you could call it a kinder, gentler take on character armor. But that was he kind of dropped it later in life, but that was a very early influence of his. Probably where I came to know Reich is I kind of stumbled in. Well, no, I found Reich first through Robert Anton Wilson, but I also found Hakomi in parallel. So anyhow. So what's next for Dev? You've made a change of locale and continuing your school and your channel. You have a school as well, I guess we should say.
Well, yeah, I kind of I mean, I worked with people, I mean, in terms of being a therapist, in a whole group of other therapists running stuff for quite a long time in the Osho community. And then I was a bit more on my own in Brighton, in south of England, for a few years. And now I'm kind of super on my own. And I've just taken on one guy who's done quite a lot of work with me and my online courses. And he's helping me a bit with some stuff. And I'm creating this school. We just had a meeting with the people who are on the part 2 of this training, have already been through this kind of 52-week online course, which is quite a
Oh,
challenge to
wow.
complete, I would think, for anybody. Most people who've been on it would ratify that, I think. And the ones you have, I just thought, well, they're kind of committed, and I'm a bit bored of just being on my own in this thing for the last few years. So, the idea is to create more of a school. I'm learning a bit more about marketing, online courses, customer engagement, and just trying to. I mean, it makes enough money for me to live fairly comfortably, but I would like to also expand it a bit and try and pull a few more people in and do it in a kind of organic way, and that kind of thing. So it's a slow kind of feeling my way process and starting to involve other people a bit more, and get a bit of a school feeling going is really where I'm at. And at the same time, just kind of transitioning into being a digital nomad and traveling around for a while, because I traveled quite a lot in my 20s and 30s, but then when I got into therapy, I just ended up staying in one place for a very long time. So I'm kind of got itchy feet.
So this is just a temporary thing in the Ukraine, is that?
Well, it's temporary because I've only got a 90-day visa, and I can't really be bothered to get a longer one, which is a lot of drama, and it's also the Russian winter coming pretty hard. So I'm going to the UK for a few weeks because I'm co-running a group there, and then I'm going to go somewhere else, but I haven't quite worked out yet where yet. But
fantastic. All right. Well, I'm really just excited to have found you, or you found me actually, but because you have such an extraordinary resource on this, that it's great to see all that. Maybe we'll transition to just some discussion, general discussion.
Yeah, sure. Or we can pick up this idea, because I remembered when you were speaking last week, and we'd kind of gone off on our political thing, and I was going off on my political thing or whatever. Like you'd mentioned earlier on that you were a men's coach or running men's workshops, and I kind of thought, well, I've been in that as well, and most of the people watching us probably would like to hear a bit about that, possibly. So I don't know. You want to talk about your work with men or your perspectives on masculinity or whatever kind of interests you?
Yeah, gosh, that's I mean, I started working, and well, for example, I was an engineer, and I still live in the small town where my small engineering college was, and I was able as a therapist to get on their referral list. And so I got to work with a lot of the students, and I was the only male therapist, so they sent me a lot of the male students. And that was a real treat. And I understood the rigors of our engineering education. But also I just started working kind of with couples and men for the most part when I started my therapeutic career. And as a one-on-one therapist, I don't know that there's too much there, other than as a man, I just kind of provide another man to have a man-to-man talk with, kind of on that base relational level of therapy. It was just maybe easier people that were looking to just, guys that were looking to turn to another guy to kind of share what's going on. I provide that avenue and just had the male perspective, I guess, on things, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started sitting in my school that I went to for psychotherapy. Naropa University is kind of an alternative university. It's Buddhist based, very grounded in embodiment and relationship and mindfulness. But it was what you call experiential therapy, in the way that every class was like group therapy. Not every class, but certainly the more intense ones. So even in like group therapy class, we did group therapy, but we had a lot of other, it was small classes. We sat in a circle, and it was often just some kind of, when we learned how to be therapists one-on-one, we just fishbowled it. We put two cushions in the middle. One was a therapist, one was a client, and the rest of us sat around and watched. But the point being, there's like your community, an intense amount of personal work going on. And after I got out of school, I did training, which also had more of that training in Gestalt and Hakomi, which also, you play client, you play therapist. There's a lot of deep personal work going on. But I was trained out, I was schooled out, and then it was like I was still kind of craving a place to do my work, and I discovered men's groups. And I went to one It was a very Boulder one up. I live half an hour south of Boulder, and which is a very progressive liberal town here, college town nearby. And this men's circle was kind of unique for this practitioner, but it was in a teepee in the woods, and it was very special in a way. The ritual that he put around it, we had to cross a little stream to get to the teepee, and then had a fire going in a teepee, and we had a fire keeper. And it was like a genuine, authentic teepee. It was just a neat experience. And so I did that, and it just kind of puttered along. And as a therapist, I started running my own men's groups, which I found my clientele just kind of wanted a space to have meaningful conversations. So we didn't do too much deep work in those groups, but it would, eventually there would be a comfort level and people would drop and get comfortable, and we could do a little more deep work. And all along, I kind of heard about this group called the Mankind Project. I had a classmate at Naropa that invited me in, but at that time I had 2 small children, and it just didn't have the bandwidth and wasn't really ready, or just not ready, but just not interested at that time. And then when I went to move from therapy to coaching, I was in a coaching group led by a kind of a senior coach. And one of the guys in there in the group with me kept talking about Mankind Project. And I finally was like, that they have men's groups all over the world, but they have initiation weekends, which are, it's like Friday night to Sunday night, Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. So 48 hours, call it the New Warrior Training Adventure.
Mm.
And it's kind of like their initiation weekend. And I talked to my buddy, and he was like in this coaching group, and he was like, just sign up, just do it, just go, no expectations, don't look it up, don't Google it, just go. And I did. It was great. It wasn't my first rodeo, but it wasn't my first rodeo. So I didn't have like a deep transformative experience necessarily, but I got it. And well, to back up a second, say this with a little hesitation, but I shouldn't. There's something for me as a heterosexual male where I'm sitting in a circle of men and I can relax a little deeper. And Naropa in counseling psychology school and a lot of the trainings, it's like me, the token male, and a bunch of women, and there's just the sexuality factor floating around that just gets a little messy. There's something about being in a circle of men where the sexuality was completely removed for me, and I could just relax and be completely me. And that was very important, really important. Just having that group of guys where I could hang with the guys, so to speak. And as an engineer, I had a lot more male companionship in the past. And so, Mankind Project is like the 800-pound gorilla in men's group work. They have stuff all over Europe and North America. They're really expanding in South America, and I'm not sure where else, but those I think are the main things they have going on right now. And they have this weekend, and they have all kinds of other trainings and things, but the main thing they have is the training weekend, and then just the groups themselves. But there's no like, here's the leader of the group and he knows what he's doing and he's a trained therapist. It's more like we're just all a bunch of amateurs. And so, you learn to lead a group, you learn to lead some deep process work, you learn to sit in a group. A lot of what I've seen is they have really good ways for dealing with projection and emotional charge, particularly anger. A lot of work around integrity and accountability, things like that, things you might call more masculine values. Mm-hmm. A lot of times what I find in these groups is that they're really good on internal work, but that they're really distant relationally. I'll be honest, you go to a Mankind Project party and it could be just a bunch of guys. There's no girlfriends, there's no women, and it's just a little weird. It's not completely true, but I just think sometimes the training is lacking in relationship. I guess that would be my big criticism. of it. And at the same time, they really set the structure up so that amateurs can support amateurs. You know, there are people that get good at it. There are trained therapists and coaches within there that can run a good group really amazingly. And it's, I'm going to pause for a second. It might be a little talked out, but um, that's just kind of been my experience of it, that at the bottom, the base level, there's these groups are scattered about. You know, every big city probably has a Mankind Project group. And if you're struggling as a man, you're in divorce and you're feeling lonely, you can look that up and find a community that can support you through tough times, I'd say. And that's really invaluable. You know, men tend to be loners, I think, by nature. And maybe if they do get together, it's for beers and sports, and it's not necessarily a meaningful conversation. And this is really an avenue for men to find support with other men. And I think there's something very primitive about that. And I mean that in the best sort of way. Like, it's primal for men to gather with other men and support each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Um,
I mean, we have the Mankind Project here in the UK and in Europe, you know, and I never did their initiation thing. Quite a few male friends I know have done it, you know, and I think their work, what I hear of it, is just fucking great, basically, because I don't know, I became a bit aware of I mean, I've always been a bit of always like hanging out with the guys when I was younger. I was a bit like that, and working in
yeah.
construction, and I mean, mostly they were just drinking buddies, basically because you don't want to sit on your own getting trashed, so you do it with guys. You know, it's a sort of thing that some of us do at that age. You know, not everyone is not at all conscious, but it's just how it is. And at some point, I mean, in the last decade, I don't know, that men's issues seem to come to more prominence somewhere in my brain, and I think in society generally,
Yeah.
you know, like, because we do live in this kind of patriarchal world, and women were kind of stepping up to, you know, confront that, and feminism and things like this. And what happened for me was, because being an Osho sannyasin, you see, it's very feminine. You know, the whole Osho scene was a total matriarchy. I don't think there aren't any other matriarchies really around in the 20th century, really, and it was completely matriarchal, the whole structure. So
Really?
I'd lived in quite a matriarch. I mean, I didn't, not that this is with the original Osho commune. All the power roles, I mean, Osho was kind of there, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking, doing his discourses. All the power roles underneath that were run by women. And men might take on a bit of security or bodyguard stuff sometimes for Osho, that kind of thing, Shivraj and that. But like, everything else was an absolute feminine dominated power structure. And I just find that shit really interesting, apart from anything else. You know, how is it when women run the show? You know, so I was, anyway, to go back to the guy thing, I was kind of used to living in quite a female dominated environment, because the Osho communes that came in Osho's wake also used the same principle. They just naturally morphed that way. The women had power. And the kind of guys that show up tend to be not so kind of archetypal male, like you might say The Rock or something like that in America, you know, the ex-wrestler guy, that kind of archetypal kind of, you know, they're more in the Philip Glover, nice guy kind of archetype, you know, soft in Viking character structure, oral, you know, this kind of thing. And so I'd lived in this environment for a long time. Where am I going with this? Well, one strand was I met a lot of guys who would come to the Osho scene, and they wanted to meet women, and, you know, they wanted to have sex as well, you know, but they were very feminine, and the guys would, sorry, the women would be would hang out with them, you know, as
Friend zone.
as nowadays you call it the friend zone in America, you know, that was it totally, you know. And so it would get, you know, they're having a meaningful conversation on the sofa for 3 hours about something, and the guy's really listening to the woman, and then, you know, it's getting near nighttime, and the guy's thinking, oh, am I going to get some action tonight? This feels really good. And then suddenly she just disappears off with some tattooed ex-drug addict who's kind of doing to kind of get over his stuff, you know, and the men are completely fraught and forlorn by this, you know, and so I started to pick this up a little bit with a group called Man Up, looking at some men's issues and stuff like that, and I started to learn a bit more. And then at some point I was dialoguing a little bit with a quite famous YouTube guy in the States called Elliot Hulse, who's like a South Florida strongman with a huge following on YouTube back in the sort of 2000s and stuff. And just a little bit, I had a meeting online with him, and we were looking at him maybe coming to the center sometime. And then he does his own thing. He came off Osho, but he came to the UK and he invited me to come along he was doing a series of kind of talks and a bit of therapy stuff. And I went along to this thing in London. I just didn't really have a role, but I mean, he'd invited me along, and I was so inspired by like 100 young guys, guys in their early 20s from sort of 18 to 25, most of them, who were just really up for change and doing stuff and working on their stuff. And I was so inspired by that. I just thought, and the workshop itself was more talking stuff and a bit of Osho meditation, but like, I was so inspired. I just thought, fuck it, I've got to start something for these kind of guys, So I started Project Man, and we developed some kind of structures to help men with kind of masculinity and this kind of thing, and just a little bit freeform and bioenergetics and some personal psychodrama work, looking, kind of creating some of the old dramas that you went through with your dad or with your mum. We had a rather amusing thing called the hooligan structure, which used to attract a lot of people, and which men could, because if there's one thing that will move a nice guy out of the nice guy faster than anything, in fact, it's unbelievable. It's a hooligan structure where you set it up a certain way. Like, hooligans are part of British culture, and football hooligans basically in the 80s and 90s, and then it got kind of shut down by closed circuit TV and all this kind of thing and the government. But essentially, you split the guys into two groups, and the staff have to be cops. And one is the Reds, one's the Blues, and they do certain interactive structures where at some point they just start, the hooligan is just very extrovert, screaming abuse, hurling stuff, and just, you're not good enough. It's this kind of combating thing. And for nice guy, I mean, it doesn't, if I discuss it, it probably sounds politically utterly incorrect, but I had testimonials from guys who'd been locked in the nice guy for like decades, saying, my God, my whole body has been coursing with adrenaline for the last 2 months since doing this structure for an hour. It's like, we developed a few, myself and some assistants, developed some different little structures to work with the guys, and we did bio, and there's more personal work as well. And that was great fun to run, it was great fun, but COVID came along and it kind of came to an abrupt end. But I do feel that a lot of young men are really underserved on a severe level, and not only are they underserved, it's like, because it's a kind of patriarchal culture, the assumption is that men have it easy, which is totally not the fucking case. It's just really not the case. Yes, women are discriminated against and put down and controlled by the society, and in many ways I totally agree with that, actually. And I don't consider myself remotely anti-feminist, but at the same time, men do not necessarily get a good deal out of it. They need more ritualized developmental challenges typically than women. And, even to learn to communicate with each other in a more authentic way doesn't really happen in the society. They don't get these kind of, Joseph Campbell hero's journey kind of things, So, it's just, I just do feel it for the guys sometimes, that they're just trying to become men. There's no real structure for them to do that, and then they're getting a shit ton of stuff from social media about how they've got to be nice all the time. It's just like quite a fucking mess, really.
I totally agree. On the practical side, I bring up Mankind Project, and that's who I mostly do my work with, but they are the 800-pound gorilla, but there are little, anything from a local therapist like you starting a men's group locally to smaller organizations. A friend of mine I know is involved with Man Uncivilized, I think, and they call themselves The Nation, and they're here locally, and they're more very similar, but more nature-based in their approach. And so, I guess my main point is that that's the big one that might be easiest to find if you're looking for something, but there's all kinds of men's circles run by your local therapist and smaller organizations. But in the bigger picture, I love what you're saying about, well, it seems to me that the women kind of grew up and stepped into their power in the second half of the 20th century. And the men are still basically sitting there like toddlers holding their dicks. And I think, when you talk about the patriarchy, I think you're talking about a model dominance and submission, and male dominance, obviously, with the patriarchy. And the women aren't looking to dominate. They're just, and I think that's where the men are confused. They're just looking to relate and to be equal. And so we've moved from this hierarchy thing to where the women have kind of grown up and said, all right, I just want to be met. And the guys don't know what to do with that. And so to me, that, yeah, we need men's work more than ever, to grow as men, but also to learn how to meet women as equals and to relate to them, as opposed to just, the patriarchy is hard on men too, because not everybody can be the alpha dog. There's only one alpha male in any given situation. And I think that is where, men have to submit to the patriarchy as well. And we've just kind of been living in this dominant, submissive culture for, I don't know, since we climbed out of the trees maybe. And now it's time for something more relational and more, that's to me equality, not dominant submission, but equality and through relationship.
I also see quite strong dynamics between older and younger men as well. This was picked up very well by this chap, Canadian writer who wrote Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk. He wrote his other books were less famous, but he wrote this book not long ago, Adjustment Day, in which the intro subtext, it changes, but it basically is that all the old men in who are running a country, they find, when the young men are reaching above a certain level, numbers of young males, they find another country run by old men who's also got a lot of young men rising above a certain level, and they agree to start a war with each other so that a large number of the young men can be killed off and no longer threaten the kind of virility and power base of the older men. And I definitely feel strands of this in patriarchal culture as well, in the way that young men aren't really initiated into manhood. They're just kind of subjected to some form of slavery, of which the only way out really is to rise up the system and become an enslaver yourself. It's kind of, I don't have it all mapped out in my brain, but there's definitely something like that goes on with a very unhealthy kind of relationship between older and younger men. And at the same time, as an older guy, 60 years old, still act pretty childish a lot of the time. But I also find, in the last 5 years, a lot of motivation to support young guys, not just to be nice to them and shit, but to actually support them to get developmental challenges. It's like a natural thing that I kind of started to feel around the age of 55. Like, this is what I want to do now. I want to teach people and also support them to go through change, and you see that in the Mankind Project and like the Elders thing that they run, I think it's above 50s, and this is just really, really missing in society. It's become like somewhere the old men just try and control the younger men, or kill them off if there's too many of them and they feel threatened. I mean, Chuck Palahniuk obviously is just, he's doing his thing, but I mean, there's some very interesting strands of thinking in there somewhere, and
that's fascinating. Yeah. I've never quite thought like that, but I think you're right. To me, that's more than just the dominance and submission is, and the elders, eventually the young males are going to challenge the elders for supremacy and power, and they're really responding to that threat quite naturally by trying to extinguish the youngsters. It's just thinking about that. I guess I'm at this age. I'm 49 and no longer looking for elders as much as or mentors. No longer looking up to people like I used to, but not quite at the point where I do a lot of mentoring, but I never quite thought of myself as an elder. So I feel like I'm in that middle range where I don't quite have that perspective. But that's lovely the way you bring that up, and it's certainly a vital part of. A lot of this is just recreating the community that we don't really have anymore, that we're all split up and isolated in our homes and our cars and our jobs. And, you had a community where you could sit down in a circle of men and you could sit down with an elder and just even to feel the presence of an elder man and his wisdom and his presence. Good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, totally feeling that presence. And I mean, just being, like you said, in the company of just men, it's like it is something very special. It is something very special. The thing that's there. And sure, if there's women around, then the guys will start their competition trips or whatever. But when you're just there to be men for a weekend or something, it's a very special kind of space that's created somehow for guys, and like I say, there is this part of, I think, any natural male that at a certain age you just want to support younger men to go through their stuff and
Yeah.
and step up and just really be the best man they can be.
And provide those rites of passage, like you mentioned
Yes.
earlier, the initiations, and that's really missing in our society as well. Powerful work. Well, certainly I advise folks to look into that. To me, it's become my community. It's become my place of support. It's a place I go, I have a circle that meets every Tuesday, and I'm not a regular, but at the moment, COVID has kind of blown us all to hell. We had Zoom meetings for a while, and now we're transitioning back to in person, and it's kind of the transitions can be rough in terms of membership and attendance, and I haven't been so great either, but it's definitely provided a safe space for me to bring things that's beyond my wife, that she doesn't need to bear all of that either. Whew. Well, what else have we got to talk about?
I don't know, man. I mean, Mike, I don't know. I mean, is there anything else that's kind of you think's pressing on you these days? I was reading something. I mean, it's political though. The other day, and I was reading about, is Trump going to come back? And it again, but maybe that's not your kind of thing. I was kind of that and whatever. And I'm kind of looking at America a little bit, because I think, if something is going to lead Western culture again, if it needs leading, if whatever or whatever happens, it's probably going to come out of the States. It's probably not going to come out of Europe.
I think there's been a lot of fear that Trump is going to come back lately, or maybe hope, depending on your point of view. He just launched a SPAC stock offering. It's kind of a new style, like an IPO. And he's very successful, and he's looking to create a media empire. And the latest thought I heard is that this could really occupy his attention, rather than become, run for president again. He might just run a media empire and try to, who knows? American politics has gone off the rails. I appreciate that the Europeans are looking for us for guidance, and I hope we haven't created too much disillusion.
Well, I don't know so many Europeans look. I'm always interested in America and Americans, actually.
I think what we do well in America that I'm hopeful on is entrepreneurship and innovation.
Yeah.
And I think that I probably touched on this last week, but that we're just on the cusp of a lot of innovative breakthroughs that are going to completely reorganize society. And so that's my hope, is that these innovative breakthroughs kind of push us out of this mess that we're in right now, and help kind of usher us to the next level, or whatever the next stage of development and next stage of human society, or whatever that is. And from what I can tell, we are really close, within like 5 to 10 years of major technological disruption. So cross my fingers that'll. Politics to me is like the last thing to change. And in my mind, it's really technology that drives progress. I know technology it's not exactly without its negative side, and in today's day and age, where it's popular to kind of really choose sides on everything. Some people are anti, technology, and when Amazon gets too big and it becomes in vogue to hate on it, and certainly they're probably overworking and abusing their workers and thinking of them as just like robots to be replaced someday by real robots. But so there are some issues with Amazon, no doubt. We'd sure like to get their founder to pay a little bit more taxes and their company to pay more taxes, but they've completely disrupted the retail industry, and maybe the mom and pop stores have suffered because of that, and that does suck. But I think the innovation lowers costs, it brings options, it does a lot we don't realize. I just kind of got on a ramble there about, well, it's my ramble about technology and innovation driving progress.
Well, I think that's kind of, I think even Marx, Karl Marx had technological determinism, kind of came from that a society is governed or finally ruled by the level of its tech or something. I don't know, something like that. I don't know.
I think you're right. I don't, not intimately familiar, but I think he does have a rap on technology.
Something like that. But what was I going to say is like, I mean, I guess one of my final kind of, a lot of people want stuff to go back to how it was before or something like that. But I don't think there's really, in human civilization, we've never been very good at standing still, so it's like, it's kind of, even looking at men's issues, which mostly come out of the way tribal society is broken down as I see it, so that, the men are just left on these, working muck jobs or whatever you call them and this, and, and it's like, but even, that it's like, we've never been very good at standing still, a civilization is just something driving it and moving it, and change is kind of inevitable, and somewhere you have to just kind of be with it. I'm kind of I don't know if Reiki is going to come back. I was interested to see this Dan Lowe guy that you interviewed, like Lowe, I think it's Lowe was his name, and like and what I noticed was just looking him up, he'd been on a few podcasts, most of which were a little bit, or some of them certainly looked a bit more like, okay, but the kind of wacky end of psychedelia or something like that slightly, and look at sort of old Reich, and this kind of thing. And he probably played up this image as well, and it played to this kind of stereotype in certain ways, consciously or otherwise. But also, there was like a, immense valuable kind of concepts around mind, body, and integration all in there, that have never really been picked up by society. And because he went, I mean, people say he went off the rails, whatever, but like I do still find him a fascinating kind of character, and in the sense that he developed some really awesome fucking stuff. I was kind of reading this book. Maybe I can't remember last time. The Mosquito Coast. Have you read this book by Paul Theroux?
I've heard there's a movie. I think a Harrison Ford movie
nowadays on some Netflix thing, but like, I was struck by the comparison to Reich, to the protagonist, Ali Fox, is this kind of American inventor who's like totally against planned obsolescence, wants to do everything really, really good, wants to make something that's really going to last and create a fantastic innovation, regardless of capitalism and kind of, making money out of it. He just wants to make really great shit. And he gets so frustrated by America, this is like in the 80s, that he ends up taking his family and his kids, his wife, on a boat to the Honduras. And then he buys a chunk of land in the middle of fucking nowhere in the jungle and proceeds to set up this ice factory to this invention that he's done. And he ends up creating an ice factory in the middle of the jungle. It all goes fucked up wrong. And in the final kind of third of the book, he's constantly moving up river in this knackered old boat with his family. He refuses to go with the flow. This was the kind of image that later struck me. This was Reich. And this guy, Ali Fox, in the book, I haven't seen the movie thing, is like, he's a prize pain in the ass to be around, of course, the worst, and he's someone who you might get super inspired by and fascinated by for a while and hang out with. At some point, he probably just abuses you a load and you just, fuck this, I'm getting out of here. And 5 years later on, when you process that, you realize you actually got a lot of development from this guy. And I see Reich very, very similar, someone, I mean, he's been kind of deified and he fits into a lot of conspiracy mythology, which I don't really agree with his whole thing in the FDA and his imprisonment and that. But he's just one of these guys who refused to float, to go with the flow, and he's always going upstream. He's always looking to stuff. He refuses to kind of compromise in any way, shape or form. And he sucks people in and then they spin out because they're just more natural, normal human beings and they can't tolerate this lunacy anymore. But everybody got something from him, that's something, that was an insight I kind of had reading that book, that maybe that was a little bit who Reich was, kind of idea.
That, yeah, that's the essence I get too. It's like, well, the book, his biographer, which I guess was a friend of his. In fact, I think Reich ended up marrying his ex-wife. But anyhow, Myron Scharf.
I think he's Myron Sharaf. Yes.
Yeah. But the name of the book is Fury on Earth,
Yes.
right? And that's what, when I heard you talking, I just get this idea of like a force of nature. And people like that, like Aleister Crowley and Timothy Leary. I just did a podcast on Timothy Leary, and maybe he doesn't quite come off that way, but these guys lived like 9 lives. They really just lived. Reich was all, he had one idea, and then he was kind of developed it into the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one, and next thing you know, he's chasing UFOs. And if you really follow the line of thought, like Dan says, it makes sense. Whereas if you just hear he's chasing UFOs, you might be like, oh, but
Times was writing about UFOs not long ago, wasn't it? I don't know. But anyway.
I think but what you're saying, I think we touched on this last week. The more and more we go into this digital world, earlier you said, people want to go back. And I think just on one level, we're moving from an industrial society to a digital society, and there's no going back. It's just going to accelerate. But as we move into a digital world, we're going to need embodiment and relationship, and we're going to need this mind-body connection, because otherwise we're just going to become all mind. And so I think now more than ever, this stuff is becoming important. I mean, one thing I got from Reich is he was just so far ahead of his time, nobody could understand him. So he was persecuted because he's just, light years ahead of himself, and people couldn't get it. But now I think his work is going to be, and maybe it won't come through him, but his successors and people like you and some of the other body-based therapies that are starting to emerge that aren't maybe as intensive, or just a different perspective, I think, on body-based therapies. But there's just a lot of embodiment practices that are coming out. And I think we're going to find a relationship between human relationship and embodiment, and going to be more important than ever.
Yeah. Hopefully we're at some kind of darkest stage before the dawn. What do they call it? I don't know, something like that in our culture.
Yeah. And when we talk about this embodied, I think what you were saying earlier about bringing up the past, a lot of people get a fascination in America. The thing here to do is to kind of get enamored with Native American lifestyle or practices and mythology.
Yes.
But the whole idea is this tribal living, and people want to go back to this tribal living. And obviously we're never going to go back to it. But there's something about this connection to the environment and the planet that comes with embodiment and relationship that we're going to need as well. We need that tribal hunter-gatherer connection to the earth. We definitely need to revive that, but I don't think we're going to necessarily return to that kind of living. Anyway, just wanted to.
I think that's, it's like we're kind of exploring how far can we go with just our mind. That's been kind of happening since the 70s or something like that. And, even in therapy terms like CBT, and I was reading something by this US psychologist who was criticizing how the VA, the Veterans Association in America, they'd kind of dumped traditional psychotherapy or something in this article, and they just said, we now have gold standard CBT that we're giving these veterans, and the veterans were saying, this is bollocks and it's not working. I'm still miserable and PTSD'd, and that sort of, it was all scientifically proven, but the actual result wasn't up to much. It's like we're researching all the time, or the society is just trying. The mind almost is just, it's almost like Osho, the mind is trying to find some way it can escape from the body. It's trying to find a way it can escape from the body, and I don't know if it's going to succeed. And the ultimate way, of course, is through things like what Elon Musk has been researching. Whether you can transfer consciousness in a sense onto silicon, basically, and this kind of thing, and it's like that almost on a macro level, we're somewhere researching this concept that can the mind just leave the body behind, this repository of our past and all these animal emotions and dominance hierarchies and all this heavy, violent, warlike shit that we carry around with us, you know, that you know, mostly what we've done in the last is not so much transcend through awareness in the last 50, 100 years, but transcend through dissociation, as I see it. You know, it's like, so, you know, it's like we've disconnected from
Right.
all this heavy emotional past we have in our DNA, and you know what's yeah.
I saw a great meme that said, "You're not enlightened, you're disassociated." And that just hit me, because kind of that spiritual bypass thing of escaping into your mind. And boy, so much comes up when you talk, and then I don't know, you know, I want to tangent off about 6 different ways, but one of the ones that hits me, I think it was kind of an archetype in the Osho community, Zorba the Buddha.
Yeah.
Is it, and
Yeah.
this idea that we have, you want to be present, I guess, the Buddha, but you also want to have a kind of that hedonistic Zorba the Greek. You want to have a good time too. And so that comes up for me, because it's like, well, I want all this digital age stuff, and I need my body, my relationship, and my planet. So
No, that's a really great metaphor, Mike. I think really great.
Yeah. Well, hopefully folks like you and me, you've got quite going on with your YouTube channel and your school. I need to up my offering, but that's all in the works. So
Yeah,
we can change all this.
Yeah. Well, it's good to just live your truth, hey, and do what you do in this life. That's what I think, you know, do what you got to do in this life.
Yeah. Well, I think my to-do is to be a bigger presence. So I'm just starting to get involved with that. So moving out of my little world of one-on-one work and out into the big wide world. So always a pleasure to talk and share ideas.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure to do these 2 podcasts with you, Mike, and thank you so much for taking part so early in the morning over there in the West Coast of America. So I really appreciate you, man, and I think you're doing great work.
Thank you. Same back to you.